Hi, my name is Jesus, and my distance lab group consists of me, Jana McDermott, and Olivia Wyatt. And we did our experiment on the appearance and texture of gravy with modified versus unmodified cornstarch.
Cornstarch is made from the endosperm of a corn kernel, and it can be used as a thickening agent in many foods such as gravy, pudding, and fruit pie filling. Other applications of cornstarch in foods, according to the FDA, include using it as a stabilizer, a texturizer, sweetener, and an anti-caking agent. It is typical to add 1 tablespoon of cornstarch per cup of gravy. In this experiment, the appearance and texture of gravy with different levels of modified and unmodified cornstarch were compared. Our control recipe was made with 2% unmodified cornstarch, and then we had 3 test recipes made with 1% modified cornstarch, 1.4% modified cornstarch, and 2% modified cornstarch. 19 participants rated how much they liked the appearance and texture of each gravy on an intensity scale in Qualtrics. Their points were converted to numerical values on a scale of -100 to 100 for us to analyze. The purpose behind the study was to determine if adding 1.4% modified cornstarch to the gravy would improve the appearance and texture of gravy as compared to using 2% unmodified cornstarch in our control recipe. For this experiment, we hypothesized that gravy made with modified cornstarch will have a higher rating as compared to gravy made with unmodified cornstarch, because the stability of the gravy would be improved by the modified cornstarch. This is based on the idea that modified cornstarch is made to give food products more desirable qualities in texture and stability.
And for our methods, we use a control for our gravy consisting of 1 tablespoon of butter, 1 cup of chicken broth, 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, and 1/4 cup of water. For all of our gravies, we would first melt the butter in a saucepan, and while the butter was melting, we would then start mixing the cornstarch and water on the side. The only difference between the different levels was the percentage of cornstarch. In our other levels consist of modified cornstarch with a 1% variance, a 1.4% variance, and a 2% variance. Once the butter was fully melted, the cornstarch and water mixture was added along with the chicken broth. The entire mixture was then brought to a boil for at least 1 minute, and finally we would pour the mixture into a container and let it cool until we could put it in the freezer for 24 hours. Once the 24-hour period was over, we would thaw the gravy in the microwave in each individual container for about 2 minutes. Once the gravy was thawed, we recorded videos of us stirring and pouring the gravy to highlight the appearance and texture. Once we recorded all the videos, they were all loaded over to Qualtrics survey, and there we sent out the survey to willing participants. During the Qualtrics survey, the participants would rate this gravy on a scale of -100 to 100, and in terms of worst ever, neutral to best ever, on both appearance and texture. In the video, each gravy had a 4-digit code along with it, so participants did not have a bias knowing which gravy was modified or unmodified, or on different variances to keep bias low.
When analyzing the results for the 1% modified cornstarch and 2% unmodified cornstarch, a paired t-test was used for both the appearance and texture. The Shapiro-Wilk test showed that all of the data was normally distributed. There was no significant difference in the preferences of appearance or texture between the 1% modified and 2% unmodified cornstarch. As you can tell from the charts and tables shown, the control was preferred for the texture with a mean of -67.53, but the modified was preferred for the appearance with a mean of -68.58. The box and whisker plots that are provided show just how very small the preferences are for both the texture and appearance.
For the 1.4% modified cornstarch gravy, both the appearance and texture liking were statistically analyzed using a paired t-test because the data was normally distributed. The result was that the gravy with 1.4% modified cornstarch was preferred in texture and appearance versus the control gravy with only unmodified cornstarch. A p-value of 1.5 times 10 to the negative fifth was calculated for the appearance comparison, and a p-value of 6.8 times 10 to the negative fifth was calculated for the texture comparison. Gravy with modified cornstarch was consistently rated higher for appearance with a mean rating of -3.53 as compared to the gravy with unmodified cornstarch, which had a mean rating of -69.74. Gravy with modified cornstarch was also consistently rated higher for texture with a mean rating of -2.84 versus a mean rating of -67.53 for the gravy with unmodified cornstarch. The box and whisker plot visually showed the distribution of the liking rating for both the appearance and texture rating of each gravy. It shows how the gravy with 1.4% modified cornstarch was consistently rated higher than the control gravy with only unmodified cornstarch.
As a result, for the 2% modified cornstarch gravy, we'll start with the appearance of the gravy with the 2% modified cornstarch versus the gravy with the 2% unmodified cornstarch. As you can visually see in our whisker plot graph, it represented in orange is the modified cornstarch and in blue is the unmodified cornstarch. You can visually see that the modified cornstarch was rated higher in appearance with a means rating at around 69.7, with unmodified cornstarch just barely above 0 of 0.4, indicating that the results show that the gravy with modified cornstarch was preferred over the control. As we look at the texture, comparing the gravy with 2% modified cornstarch versus the control gravy of 2% unmodified cornstarch, the whisker plot graph also represents visually that the modified cornstarch was preferred over the cornstarch texture. The control had a means average of -67.52 for texture, and modified had a means of 5.7, indicating that in both appearance and texture, modified cornstarch gravy was preferred over our control of unmodified cornstarch.
Adding modified cornstarch helped to improve the texture and appearance of the gravy, which aligns with our hypothesis. However, we did see that the level of modified cornstarch mattered. For example, the gravy with 1% modified cornstarch only had a better texture when compared to the control recipe. When we used 1.4% and 2% modified cornstarch, we did see an improvement in the texture and appearance. This experiment could also be modified by having people stir the gravy themselves. This could change the results of the statistical analysis because watching a video is not the same as being able to see and stir the gravy in real life. Another modification of this experiment is to try it with different control recipes. Perhaps certain ingredients might react negatively with the modified cornstarch in terms of texture and appearance. We could also test using modified cornstarch versus flour. A final idea that we thought about changing is the amount of time the gravy took to boil.